Hello, Story Seekers. I'm Ben.
I'm Nico, and you're listening to The Tiny Bookcase.
Here we are for a special episode. Not only the end of season 4,
But also our 2-year anniversary episode.
we've gone and grabbed a glaringly obvious prompt and put together some stories for you.
I actually can't believe it's been 2 years.
It went. I mean, it went very quickly, largely because the world was on fire for most of it, and
That is true.
it's kind of difficult to just sort of, kick your feet and count the days when
Yeah.
so many people are dying. But that, rather uncomfortable fact aside, it's also been really cool exactly how much and how consistent we have written.
I think that's the biggest thing for me is there's no way if someone had said to me, I need you to sit down and write every week, write a new story every week, go.
Yeah,
I don't think I could have done it, but I have done it. So
yeah, and I think it's all because we obviously love telling each other stories and
yeah.
also finding new people to tell stories with, and it's always fun when they write to a prompt with us, and then we get three, and we're definitely going to be doing a lot more of that going forwards because we love doing it. But it has been a very quick 2 years.
Mm.
I think for me anyway, it was a big change. I went from a full time job that kept me extremely busy, that disappeared because of the pandemic, and then all of a sudden this thing that I've been wanting to do for ages, like ever since I was a little kid, writing down stories in a little notebook that didn't make any sense. I've started doing it, and it's been really special. I've really loved it. It's it's been a really big part of staying positive during the sort of darker sort of days of the isolation periods to in the pandemic for me
Yeah.
anyway. And then after it when we started to be able to do stuff in person, and it just feels, yeah, it's nice. It's now just a fixture in my life anyway of
Yeah.
a very positive creative outlet, and I really like the fact that I get to come in here and tell stories and that I've written and chat shit and meet people and hear your stories.
I think a thing that really drives it for me is knowing that people are listening to the stories and getting enjoyment out of them. It's not that I want my voice to be heard or whatever. It's that if someone's getting some happiness out of it, that's great. And to see people, coming back and getting a good time out of our good time,
Yeah,
that's excellent.
good
What
vibes all
more
round.
could you possibly want?
Yeah, I totally agree. Totally agree. Well, in honour of those 2 years of telling stories on this, our tiny bookcase, our prompt, as I said, rather glaringly obvious, is 2. You're up first, Nico. Let's have it.
2. There's another one out there, said Marjorie, with an air of importance hovering vaguely around her person. Hmm? Said Daddy. Another one. In the garden, she repeated, the importance edging itself into urgency's seat. That's nice, dear, said Kenneth, which was Dad speak for, bloody hell, I'm properly invested in this bit in the newspaper. He was reading the part where they listed the local planning permissions. He was buggered if he was going to allow that decamp fort at number 7 to build some ratty extension which was going to block the sun between 3 and 5 p.m. in the better months. Nice. Nice. One was bad enough, and now there's another one, Marjorie insisted. She stared hard at the broad sheet behind which a moustache rustled in righteous indignation. She turned back to the curtains, twitching an eye-hole gap into them. The submarine commander of the mind, every child ought to have one, if yours doesn't, consider investing in scuba gear, or plutonium, cried up periscope, and she squinted through the little gap. There were definitely 2 of them now. The way they thrashed and bit at each other was exhilarating. Marjorie wasn't really old enough to know if it was in a good way or a bad way, All she knew was her little heart was going like the clappers. "Don't you think we'd better do something, father?" she asked, seeking the wisdom of the older generation, on what could only be described as a tumultuous fracas. Actually, that's not fair. You could describe it in all sorts of ways. We just like the word fracas. "Well, yes, of course, I'll be down at the local council office first thing on Monday. If anyone asks, it was about the bins. De Camphor isn't nailing up one plank on my watch." A lost cause, Marjorie decided. She would have to seek Mummy, and post haste. Swapping Submariner for Mountaineer, she began the ascent of Mount Staircase. Mummy would likely be upstairs, stood before the great altar of ironing. It was, after all, Sunday, and so she would be steaming, pressing, and folding for hours. Marjorie had that figured out. There was something lost in the sheets, and Mummy was looking for it. She flattened everything out to look for lumps and bumps. She knew this because Mummy said she was going to do the ironing for some bloody piece. It didn't bode well that the lost item would be stained crimson, but Marjorie's books on adventure hadn't gone into that much detail about the whole blood thing. A surprise, really, as they were absolutely chocker with native spears, whale harpoons, and generally any sort of stick with a pointy bit on the end. Mummy was instead stood looking out of her own set of curtains, though entirely in the wrong direction, of course. The great foldable altar sat one end, heavily laden with what seemed to be an infinite number of bedsheets, which was baffling to Marjorie, as far as she was aware, there were only 2 beds in the house. The iron, Mummy's weapon of choice, stood upright, hissing softly. Marjorie wished she could press the button on its handle to create a great roaring hiss and send steam billowing, the way that Mummy did. "Mummy, you need to look out of the window," Marjorie declared, in spite of her mother's current position. "I am. That tart at number 3 sunbathing naked again. She thinks she's all that, doesn't she? Well, they'll be tough as old leather in this sun and round her knees before she knows it. What's your father doing?" Marjorie focused on the only bit in the outburst she'd understood. "He's reading the paper, Mummy." Her mother turned quickly, looking at Marjorie. There was an air of measuring in the gaze. Perhaps Mummy thought the spy was driving, when in fact Mountaineer was still celebrating the ascent with a mug of cocoa and a bawdy song about winkles and a penknife. "Good. What do you want, Marjorie?" "Can you look out of the back window, please, Mummy? There are 2 of them now, and I'm just a bit worried." 2 back windows? Marjorie was confused by this. There were lots of windows at the back of the house, but to her young mind, they were all the same window. Just some bits of the house pointed the back window in a better direction. "Please just look, Mummy," Marjorie asked, in her politest voice. Mummy sighed, a sigh that mums use. It's supposed to be quiet and just for them, and it often contains words like, "I used to go clubbing," or "Is it too early for gin?" I hate to break it to you mummies out there. They always hear it. You're not as sneaky as you hope to be. "Just want an afternoon to myself." "Go on, what am I looking at?" Mummy flung the curtains of the bedroom wide, exposing the back garden. "What am I looking at?" she asked, which was a silly question, really. She knew exactly what she was looking at. Their garden. The grass wanted cutting. She'd give Ken a word about that later. But other than that, it was just gardens. Number 11 had their overground pool out, the smug bastards. Maybe it was that. "Up in the sky, Mummy," Marjorie said, as her mother turned away, already heading back to the ironing. "I'll get your father to cut the lawn and we can get your paddling pool out later," Mummy said. Marjorie turned back to look at the 2 dragons wheeling and thrashing in the sky. They fought terribly, and the brave Lady Knight, who had once again taken residence in the imagination controls, stared up. They're really fighting terribly, she thought. Just like Mummy and Daddy. Lucky they haven't paid any attention to us. Just like Mummy and Daddy. Marjorie had to blink a few times. The tears were being all stingy. And brave Lady Knights aren't supposed to cry. Not in front of dragons. She wiped her nose with the visor of her extra special helm and looked back up. Dragons were gone. She would pick a new game. but she wouldn't bother trying to get Mummy and Daddy to play this time. A big girl, who wasn't upset by all that, took over the controls. The mountaineer went away, but the big girl, who didn't need anyone, stayed. The submariner never resurfaced, but the big girl, who was angry and didn't know why, stayed. The brave knight galloped away, but the little girl, who was scared and alone and needed someone, she stayed. At least there were two of them.
Very sad. Very sad. I liked it a lot, though. I love the way that you captured all the sort of adventurous mindset and the kind of wonderment, and very much like, do you remember the children's TV show Mr. Ben, where he used to put on
Yes, yeah,
different
yeah,
suits
yeah.
and go on adventures? I got that vibe from it with the with the submariner and the mountaineer.
Yeah, at least as if by magic the shopkeeper appeared. That
There
one,
you
wasn't it?
go. Yeah, that's the one. Um, Loved it. I really liked that depiction of uh, something that I feel like a lot of people can identify with. Um,
Yeah, that Middle English,
yeah, I
not
think
quite
so.
fitting in.
Yeah, the there are an alarming amount of similarities between your story and my story. Just forewarning
Really?
you. Yeah, it's gonna read like we wrote these at the same time in the same room talking about it.
That's wild.
Yeah, it's gonna be really interesting. I know we don't normally talk about the next story, so I won't do that. But
I have to wonder, and this is a bit of behind the curtain stuff. So we have spent some time together recently. I'm back home now,
yeah,
but I wonder if our proximity has meant that we're surrounded by inspirations
similar
in that
things.
time leading up
Yeah,
to writing
yeah,
that's led us down a similar path. Oh,
potentially.
oh,
We'd have to find out whether that happens on, like it's quite common for writers' retreats to be a thing.
yeah.
You sort of somebody books out, a bunch of cabins, and then a bunch of people go out there and write and eat and drink together and all that stuff. I wonder if they all end up sort of having a bit of an osmosis, sort of homogenization.
That sounds great, by the way. When are we doing that?
Yeah, we should do that, shouldn't we? Yeah, it'd be fun. Do a bunch of recordings in a woodland somewhere.
Right, go on. Let's hear that
No,
story
I
again,
want
but
to. I
done
want to.
better. I want to.
No, no, no. It's not that at all. I want to talk more about your story. Really liked the disinterest. I thought you captured that in the father.
Yeah,
I thought that was very well done, very quickly done as well, which is something that we perhaps don't talk about very often. But like being able to capture something with a degree of brevity is actually really impressive, and that is exactly what you did there. The mother gets more lines, and
yeah,
she really comes to life as someone that it feels like you're saying is not a very good role model for this little girl, which
yeah.
I think because this is a normal day, isn't it? This isn't like we
Yes.
caught them on their worst day. This is a normal day of neglect.
Yeah.
Um, Unfortunately, sort of systematic neglect. But I really liked her getting jealous of the young woman sunbathing naked, and that
Yes.
whole line about they'll be round her knees soon enough or something was really well delivered as a character. In the voice, I mean.
Yeah.
Um, really conjured a space and time. I liked it a lot. So yeah, I would say well done. That's
Thank you. It was it was an interesting one because the concept it kind of bled together, if you know what I mean. It was lots of little things that I thought about and ended up working a bunch of them together. And that's why it happened a few times with there were two of lots of things. It was kind of all the ideas I had being put into one place.
I find that happens to me quite a lot with this prompt business.
Yeah.
And you sort of often don't end up anywhere near where you started because
Oh, absolutely.
it's greater than some of its parts. So I know exactly the feeling that you're talking about, and I think I've been where you're standing at the moment, where you're like, yeah, this story came from somewhere.
I don't know where some of the bits came from, but the stuff in between, this sticky stuff, I have no idea.
Right, go on then. I'll take a swing. This
Let's
is
have
this
it.
is going to get weird though. Um,
I'm excited.
Right, here we
Love
go.
a bit of weirdness.
2. Mr. Musgrove, are you in there? I told you people to piss off. I'm from the planning office, Mr. Musgrove. We've come about the Viking burial barrow. I'm afraid you did not file the proper permits. There have been complaints. Meddling nosy parkers round here, the lot of 'em. Would it be possible for you to come out for a chat, Mr. Musgrove? No, I'm interred. Not a problem. I can wait until you're done. My life's die has been cast, and I'm in my final resting place. I am buried and gone, you officious bureaucrat. Leave me to my peace. Not without the proper paperwork, Mr. Musgrove. James Rena adjusted his tie and glasses and cleared his throat as the silence stretched. James was tall and thin, to the point where nothing off the rack ever fit his frame correctly. The badge on his lanyard proclaimed him as an inspector for the local council. He studied the man-made hillock that rose like a tidal wave, gathering momentum between the 2 fences that marked the property lines. Tall as he was, he could see the many other normal gardens stretching away in either direction. Plastic garden toys bleached by the sun, fence. A discarded sandpit a local cat had clearly made use of, fence. A washing line drooping from years of hard service, fence. Someone a few doors down had even recently laid a patio for those hypothetical summer days. Their barbecue sparkled with an unused gleam. Mr. Musgrove, prompted James. You'll find all the documents I've prepared inside. You want me to go inside your house? Is it locked? No, they're in the living room. James sighed to himself, mentally bemoaning the state of chaotic society, and walked to the back door of Mr. Musgrove's 2 up, 2 down. The UPVC door was unlocked as the man had said, and James stepped inside an emptied house. All of the drawers and cupboards in the kitchen were empty. The drawers themselves stuck out like tongues from under the spotless countertops. A yawning hole in the fittings where the fridge had been showed the discoloration of time on the pale yellow paint. That colour was potentially intended to give the kitchen a warm, sunny atmosphere, but reminded James of being in hospital. The hallway was much the same. The marks of absence on the wall by the stairs indicated they had held treasured memories for many years. James, who had spent most of his time watching true crime documentaries, began to feel unsettled. He imagined that he'd walked into a serial murderer's kill room. Would he be immortalised as a name on the roll call of victims? Yet the house was empty of all threats, and smelled, whilst very clean, of the sadness of old age. The place had once been a living and breathing space, filled with life, but no more. In the middle of the floor of the living room sat a large white plastic binder on which someone had written, "To whom it may concern." James picked it up and carefully flipped it open. Prominently, Mr. Musgrove's will was at the front, and seemed to mostly contain a great deal of strong language about being left alone in his burial mound. James Rena sat down on the bare floor and braced his long back against the wall before beginning to methodically read through the rest of the documents. 10 minutes later, he stepped back into the garden and walked up to the mound. Mr. Musgrove! Piss off! Can we talk about your wife? What? My condolences, Mr. Musgrove, and I know that people can react very oddly to a bereavement, but your life is not over. I swore a vow, but such things mean little to the local council, I'm sure. Till death do you part. Mr. Musgrove, your wife is dead. But I am not. We cannot be parted. I fear I shall have to involve the police, Mr. Musgrove. This is a suicide. Call who you want. I'm not leaving. I'll be back, Mr. Musgrove. James left, calling the police as he did so, and spent an unsatisfactory 20 minutes describing the situation on the phone to various officers while sitting in his car. Inside the barrow, Harry Musgrove stepped away from the boulder he had had shipped from Sweden to seal the entrance. The thick earthen walls had meant he'd been forced to yell through a crack at its edge to dismiss the council's lackey. The treasures of their life crinkled and snapped under his feet as he climbed back up the hoard to lie next to his wife. He had laid her out in her best pinny with her cold hands clutching her rolling pin to her chest, as Beowulf might have clasped Hrunting. She lay upon their fridge, at the peak of the hoard, surrounded by the small treasures, trinkets, and tools they had owned in their life together. Musgrove picked up his shovel and held it to himself in the same manner. He shifted his shoulders to find relative comfort on his old workbench. In the darkness, it almost felt to him like she was waiting for him to say something. "This is the Musgrove barrow," Harry Musgrove spoke softly, his words rumbling around the chilly chamber. "And we will be remembered. I love you, Hattie." A week later, when the council-mandated work crew was eventually allowed to dig on the property, James Rena felt it was his duty to be the first inside. Musgrove had not said another word to anyone since his exchange with James, which had made it all the harder to cut through the red tape. The Musgroves lay next to each other, illuminated by the daylight that streamed around James. The two of them, together in death, would be a sight James Rena would never forget.
It's really sad,
Yeah,
but also very
unfortunate.
beautiful.
It's unfortunate we both kind of went sad, really, wasn't
Yeah.
it?
And also that kind of like small neighborhood council interference looking over gardens. There was a lot in there, you're right.
It's massive. Yeah.
What has
Yeah.
happened recently to trigger that in us
I don't
both?
know. We haven't even been talking about planning permissions or anything like that. I don't know where
No.
this has come from.
How bizarre.
But it's clearly come from somewhere because we've both dealt with it.
Yeah.
But yes, I sort of I liked this idea of that two that will not be parted sort of thing.
Yeah, I really liked the like juxtaposition of the two characters. One man who was so certain, so set,
Yeah.
like this was his decision, this was what he'd made, and another man who was, fearful just to be walking through a house with the pictures taken down
Mm.
because of his imagination running away. This is, yeah, just a lovely sort of counterplay of characters. Juxtaposition, that's the word I'm looking for.
Yeah,
Um,
I think so. But I
some
appreciate
lovely
that.
descriptions in there as well. Really
Yeah.
lovely descriptions. Like the talking about the abandoned sandpit that local cat clearly made use of.
Yeah.
So evocative. Like it takes you straight into that mood, that feel. It's yeah. That I mean, in the same way, the same kind of thing I was trying to conjure of that sea of back gardens and that those
Mm.
little snatches of life that you see in them. I think you did actually a much better job than I did
I think I focused
of
on it a
that.
lot harder than you
Yeah,
did because my characters were dealing with it, and the central image is this just very odd, out of place, Viking burial mound that someone's put in they've used at their entire back garden
yeah.
to do it, and it's a total eyesore. It totally stands out, and it's very very strange. Um,
And he didn't get planning permission for it.
so the only other thing that I wanted to sort of really draw attention to that I went for in this
Yeah,
was that we've had a lot of people on and they said that they hate when we asked them what their sort of their trope or the cliche that they hate
the
about
the
fiction
fridging, the
is the
dead
fridging.
wife. Yes.
Exactly. So in this one, I sort of feel like she she isn't the motivation for because this man's story is over. He's dead at the start of the story. He's already locked himself inside
Yeah,
the barrow. Um, it's sort of putting her instead in putting that on a pedestal to a certain degree and be like, this is how much these people mean to each other, and he puts himself on his workbench next to her rather than, and
yeah,
she's holding a fucking rolling pin. I sort of wanted to sort of take a look at some more old world gender roles and
yeah,
mix that in with some sort of Norse afterlife and sort of Pharaoh's tomb stuff.
yeah.
Um, so
No,
yeah, I was sort of playing with that concept a little bit.
but we both. That's another through line. The kind of that male female divide and that old school attitude
Yeah,
that I do not remember us talking about that.
no, we haven't had any conversations about any of
But
the key themes and motifs inside these stories, despite the fact that we've shared them.
really weird.
It's truly weird. Yeah. I no,
Maybe
I
that
have.
means 2 years is the maximum you can do this for, Ben.
Yeah, we keep on going on about how we never write the same thing, and then for the 2 year anniversary, we turn up with two very similar similar stories with a lot of shared things.
Yeah.
That's so funny. Yeah, but as I always do. Well, actually, not always. That fucking Tom Clancy one. But I always do enjoy writing the stories, and this one, I was I was pretty pleased with. Like, I'm kind of enjoying sometimes not writing massive, well, for me anyway, like ideas driven,
Yeah.
complicated stuff that's quite difficult to fit into 1,500 words. This is sub 1,000. It tells a story. It's
But
odd.
it's
I like
about
it.
feelings. It's not about
Mhm.
actions, really. The actions have happened.
Yeah, yeah,
I think, and that's great practice. It's one thing we do get out of this is that you get to practice different types of story, and not just get to. We kind of have to.
oh yeah,
And sometimes, you get a prompt and it takes you one way, and you think, I don't know that I can write that, but I'm going to figure it out. And you do, and maybe it's not great the first time, and then you've been doing it for 2 years, and hopefully they're better and better each time. And I hope people who've been listening along are getting something out of it and getting fun stories. And I apologise to anyone who listens to this their first one and then goes back, because I
I,
bet the beginning's pretty rough now.
yeah. That first one was in space. No one can hear you scream, wasn't it?
Yes, that was our first one.
And yeah, like mine involves like an interplanetary war and black holes and
Man being fired on an asteroid into a black hole, wasn't it?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It's a bit of a turn, really, isn't it? um, but I think also, I think those of people that've been listening for a while, there's a degree of rawness in the stories that we put out there through
Yeah.
this, because we're not, although we have put out an ebook for the stories from the first season, and we're working on doing that for the later seasons at the moment. But that I consider to be like a different thing to what we're doing here. This is
Yeah.
very much like a storytelling exercise from something that we've written.
Yeah.
Um, and I think I like exposing that kind of rawness and just being like,
Absolutely.
here's something that just came out of my head. What do you think?
I mean,
Uh,
the whole mission statement, if we can call it that, is to demystify the writing process and to
yeah,
show, don't sit down with your giant brain and drop out a masterpiece. Work goes in. There are tricks and tactics, and everyone writes differently. And it's okay to write. Writing, I think, in a lot of ways, especially the storytelling element, is it's like singing, it's like dancing. There's this worry for a lot of people that you shouldn't do it unless you're good at it. And it stems from this idea that, well, you shouldn't dance unless you're a dancer. But that's not true. It's so human to tell stories and to sing songs and to dance. And it's a form of communication. And I think anyone listening, do those things. Don't don't believe that you have to be good at it to do it. You have to be good at it to sell it, but you don't have to do things just to sell them. You can do things just for your own happiness, and you should.
definitely. And also read. You know, go and read things, watch movies, etc.
Yeah.
And and like not just on a side monitor or whilst you're doing something else. Like find something that you're actually really excited to watch or read or listen to, and give it the time.
Make it your focus. Put your phone
Yeah,
away.
put your phone away, etc., etc. Because you get so much more out of it. And I'm like, I'm always preaching about that, but like, and I'm never perfect about this. I do it all the time with something like a side monitor, But when I do take the time to focus on something properly, it is really worth it, and it's something that I think we're losing um, as we progress, especially after everyone was locked inside for a year and a half. Like
Yeah.
that was a really tough time for that. So
Oh
hopefully
yeah.
people that are listening to this are getting a lot from it, even if it's just like, oh yeah, my family's fucked up like that too. Or oh yeah, my dad did a Viking burial thing once. It
My
was very
granddad buried
weird.
himself in the
Yeah,
garden.
how strange is that? Yeah, no, it's great, and we're looking forward to doing more. We'll be closing off season 4 very shortly. Um, in a few minutes, I suspect.
Oh yeah, I will say our prompt barrel's getting a little bit dry. So if you've got any
Oh
prompts
yeah,
for us, do tweet them at us at Bookcase Tiny, or just send us an email or find us on Facebook and fill us with abuse.
yeah. There's a Facebook page for the podcast and also a sort of like people that follow the podcast page as well. I forget what you call it. Is it like a supporters group or something? I forget. But it's called Story Seekers Unite.
Yes.
It's all about telling stories and what people think of it and stuff. But we often post on pages like that and like, has anyone got any prompts they'd like to hear us write? And most of the prompts that we use are versions or directly what people suggest. So do it because we love to keep writing and we want to. If you're out there and you're listening and you're like, oh, I wonder if they could write a story about limes or whatever you want. You start us off, kick us off, and we'll
You
go.
just reuse that big skeleton with the lemon story, wouldn't you, you cheating bastard?
Absolutely. Why would I not reuse that? It
I
was
mean, it was a
great.
good
Great.
story.
I'll just write the other half of it for the Lime War for an alternate reality. Get real weird with it. No, this has been great, and we'll be rather than a season 5. I think we mentioned this last episode, but rather than season 5, we'll just be proceeding with a episode number rather than a season X episode Y format. Because we're just doing this now. We've been doing it for 2 years, and we intend to keep doing it. So the idea of seasons is a bit misleading, I think, because people don't have to listen to all of it. They can dip in and out. They can start with the recent episodes and never look back, or however they want to do it.
What makes them happy?
Whatever makes them happy. That's it, really. At the end of the day, isn't it? Yeah. Well, I just want to. We've been patting ourselves on the back a little bit, but I also want to thank everyone that's been listening for 2 years. It's fucking wicked that because we know that there are a lot of you out there that have listened to us and our stories and our chats and our bollocks.
The strangeness, the ups, the downs, the jokes, many of which don't work.
Nick refuses to cut out.
Oh, I will never.
Yeah, thank you. It means a lot to us that you're listening, and we hope you like it, and we hope you continue to like it. Lots of love.
Peace.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of The Tiny Bookcase.
Remember to subscribe, otherwise you're going to miss out on the future fun.
Also, tell a friend. If you like this episode, link them to it.
We'd be tremendously grateful. You can follow us on Twitter at BookcaseTiny, Facebook at The Tiny Bookcase, and Instagram at BookcaseTiny for updates. Speaking of supporting the podcast, well, magic can only take one so far. The Tiny Bookcase is supported by the generosity of its patrons. Those kind souls have really kept my belly full the last year. Let's cast a spell for them, shall we? For magnificent beardery, let's cast the Chinicus folliculale spell on Gary Laird. For rich ginger tones on the scalp, let us cast the Orangi Hedondo spell for Scott Byrne. And for general fabulousness, why not the Ooh La La How's Your Mother spell on Matthew McLaren?
How do you come up with that shit, man?